G'day. In this series of videos, we are combining Psychopy and Python programming to create the line-bisection task. And the line-bisection task can be used to probe for visual-spatial attention or neglect in visual processing. Remember, we had these patients, or we had some patients who unfortunately suffered a stroke in their posterior parietal cortex or a certain region of their parietal cortex, and because they've lost the activity of the cortex here, they can no longer attend to certain regions of their visual field. And if we had a devastating loss of cortical area in the parietal cortex, this can manifest as a complete lack of attention being devoted, visual attention being devoted to a whole hemisphere. And we call that visual neglect. So in the first couple of videos of this series, we started with nothing and we defined our workflow and we got Python and Psychopy all up and running, and then we progressively built our experiment, our visual psychophysics experiment, and we based it off Kim et al. 2005. So if this is the first video you've watched and you'd like to see where we've come from in the first couple of videos, stop this video here, work your way back, and then rejoin us again on this video. If, however, you've done all that, we should probably get cracking. Now, in the last video, we essentially walked away with a working program, one that would present 40 trials of a line-bisection task. And remember, 10 of those tasks, or 10 of those trials, we had a perfectly bisected line. And in 15 of those trials, we had a left longer line. And in 15 of those trials, the right side was longer. And the other thing that we could do was create a data frame using pandas, and then we could save that data frame and open it up in Excel, or we could import it into MATLAB or SPSS, whatever you wanted to do, to analyze that data. There's a couple of things that I'd like to do in this video, and that is to start to create some GUIs, so graphical user interfaces, and dialog boxes. So when you run the program, it looks a little bit more professional, and it also means you don't have to go into the code, into the program that you've written, but rather it will prompt you. It will come up with a dialog box to say, hey, would you like to set up your experiments? Would you, what's the subject ID? Is there any other information that you need to put in, for a file name or something like that? The other thing we're going to do is to look at save dialogs, because what we've done at the moment, if we have a look at our program as it currently stands, we've hard-coded things like the subject ID, so we've written that into the code, whereas we could use a dialog box to store that. But you see, the other thing that we did is when we saved our program, the data that's come out of those trials, we actually hard-coded. By hard-coding, I mean we actually wrote in physically, that's the folder we want to save it in, and it's sort of very fixed. And then what we did is we then created the file name by hand, and then we created the save file path, and then if you have a look here, it was that save file path that we then passed to the output file.toCSV. Remember, that's the thing that takes that data frame and then saves it as a CSV file onto our hard drive in that location, in the file path. So what we want to do is to essentially not hard code this, but rather have a dialog box that comes up, and then you can navigate on a case-by-case basis and say, actually, I want this particular subject in this folder or that folder, or hang on, I need to set up the save file path slightly differently. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use some of the Psychopy functions here. So if we again go to psychopy.org, and again we go to the API, the reference manual, we're going to look for GUI. So if you have a look here, psychopy.gui, and this is designed to create dialog boxes. So if we just click on that, what I'm going to do as well is we'll go into our sandbox, into our play area, and we'll muck around with the GUIs and save dialog boxes just to see, how do we create them, what's the steps that we need to make, and what's returned from the GUI, from the save dialog boxes and all that. So right up the top from Psychopy, we'll also now need to import a GUI. Okay. And then what we want to do is let's just start off by creating, say, a save dialog box. So we want to essentially have some automated process that will return to us a completed save file path. So we'll say something like create a save file path using the GUI. So let's have a look here. So This is the documentation. It says DLG from dict, so that stands for dialog or dialog box from dictionary. We don't want that. We'll go down a little bit, see what else we've got to play with. So we can actually build a dialog box by hand. So we might actually do that in a little bit. And there's an example that looks like JWP. So that looks like John Pierce, who basically created Psychopy, has given us. So we'll come back to that. Open file dialog. Oh, okay. So, sorry, my mic's popping a bit. I'll step back a little bit from the microphone. Yeah, let me just shift it. I hope that's not too noisy for you. Sorry about that. We don't want to open. Here we go. File save dialog. So what we'll do is we'll say save path equals GUI.file capital S save capital DLG. Open and close, and it looks like it wants 1, 2, 3, 4 different parameters. So what do they mean? Init file path string, so that's the default path on which to open the dialog. Well, we'll just see where we end up. So we won't put anything in for that. So the initial file name, so init file name equals, and we'll just call this something like xxxxx line task. Okay, we will create an appropriate file name later on when we get the information from the setting up dialog box. Okay, and we'll make it a .csv file. Okay, we'll put this onto the next line. So comma, hit enter. Prompt. What does prompt mean? Prompt. Okay, so this will give us some command to the user to say, hey, this is what this dialog box is all about. So prompt equals, okay, select save file, something like that. Okay, and allowed. What does allowed mean? Allowed is a string to satisfy file filters. Okay, so are you going to be saving text files or image files, or we'll just leave that as all files, so we can pretty much just leave that as it is. Okay, well, let's see what happens when we run this. Okay, so what we'll do after that is we'll print out output out from save dialog. We'll just see what we return, dialog, and then we'll print out the save path. The reason why I've got that there is so when it gives it, when it logs it on the console, it will then basically print that out, and then I know what happens underneath that is, coming from this save path, as opposed to just having a random string or a random something come up. So I'm just orienting myself to, hey, this is what is going to follow. So we've got the blue circle up the top, Control S will save that. Now we'll run this again. So Python 3 line sandbox, we'll see what happens. So we run this. So in a single line of code, we actually should have a dialog box come up, and it's a save file. There we go. So here we go. Save as, all files. So yep, it's allowing all files. So it looks like the default is also allowing pickled files. We won't worry about that too much. And the shell file. And there is our standard file entry. By standard, I mean that's actually the initial file entry. Okay, and it looks like a save as file. All right, great. So if I just click save here, what happens? So output from save dialog, and there we go. We've got the actual save file path there. Okay, and remember, this is what we created in those 3 lines of code in our line task. Okay, so this save path here, which was file path plus file name, is pretty much, you see, it's that plus what we've got here, sub ID. So you see here in 1 line of code, we've got, using the GUI, we've got that save file path. So that's great. So this is good. So this will use this as our save file name. Now, what we want to do, however, is we also want to set up our experiment. So the sort of things that we want is, let's say we want the subject ID, and let's say we want the date, or some other bit of information. Let's say we want the subject ID and the subject gender and the subject age. Not sun age. Age of the sun is very old. Subject age, okay? Let's just say this is the dialog box that we want. All right, well, how do we do that? Let's go back to our documentation here, and we're going to build this from scratch. Okay, so dialog, a simple dialog box. You can add text or input boxes sequentially and then retrieve the value. So this is good. So from Psychopy import GUI, so that's good. We've done that already. What's the first thing? Well, the first thing, we will basically need to create an object, a dialog object. So we'll pretty much follow the example here. So we'll call it my DLG equals GUI dot capital DLG, and the title is experiment. Oh, sorry, it will be something like line bisection task version. What's the version? It's alpha. Okay, so something like that. All right, so that will give us the title. And then what we'll do is we'll just skip over this. We'll just skip over this bit here, and we'll just see if we can get anything coming up. So we've got the object here. What we need to do now is we need to then tell the program, hey, we want to show it to the screen. We haven't actually done that yet. So what we'll do is we'll say show dialog equals the object my dialog dot show, something like that. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll print out what we return the show dialog. And so here we'll print our reference statement just to say, hey, what's going to follow is the dialog. So experiment setup information. Okay, so we'll see what happens. So again, we'll run into our terminal. We'll run the line sandbox. So what we expect to see is a small dialog box appear, and it's come onto this screen. So let me just shift it across to this screen. You can see it there. It's really small, and we've got the title up here, and it says line bisection task version alpha, and it's got OK and cancel. So this is great. So we've got our little GUI coming up. It's not got any of that information that we want in there, but it's but we'll put that in there in a little bit. So if we just click OK there, you'll see experiment setup information. It's an empty array, okay? And then it's come into our save dialog. Okay, that's great. So we can just click save there, and we've got that save dialog. So here we've got essentially two dialog boxes coming up. Now that might be a little bit annoying for you in the future. However, you'll probably only need to run it once per subject, and so it might be okay for you. So here we go. When we closed that dialog box, it returned an empty array because we didn't save anything in our input dialog box that we created, and then we saw this output from save dialog before, and they ran one after the other. So let us now put some information into this dialog box. And so how do we do that? Well, it looks like we can add some text and then add a field that then comes in, we can add a field, and then that field will contain the information that we get. So let's put into here, so my dialog, mydlg dot add text, and this will be subject information, subject info, something like that. So again, we're just pretty much copying what we've got here, so we can probably just take this here, Command C, and then Command V there. So the name, age, and so you see here with the age, he's actually given us a default value as well. So what we can do is we can just put, just to remind ourselves, hey, this is, you'll need to put in the ID there. What else do we want? We wanted gender as well. So let's put name, add gender, name, gender, okay. And so if you have a look here, we've got an add field here, group, choices, test or control. Well, let's see if we can do a similar thing but with gender, okay? And so what we'll do here is we'll say choices, okay, and we'll say equals male, okay, female, and then prefer not to say. Or we'll say something like, we don't really want to say other because that's a little bit inconsiderate, but we'll just say something like prefer not to say, because it's a person's choice. All right, and then age. Okay, so we'll see what we get there. If we now run this program, what we'll do is we will comment out the save dialog path, because we don't need to run that. We're just interested, we've got that working already, so we're only interested now in the experiment setup side of things. Again, it's probably going to end up on this screen here. It hasn't, so I'm just going to shift it across. So let me run across here and bring it across for you. Here we go. So subject info. So you see here we've got the add text. Excuse me. Here, let me put that down there. And so here you've got the subject info, and so that's this bit here. We've added a field, and the default value is XXX. And so then that you'll have to say something like, whatever your subject ID is for that. Make sure they're de-identified and it's according to what you've got your ethical approval, your human ethics approval for. And then we've got gender, male, female, prefer not to say. Okay, so we can see we can cycle between those. And then we've got age here. I'm not 21, I'm a little bit older than that. But anyway, that will remind you to put those values in there. And then if we click OK and we print this out, you can see we've now returned an array, and in that array we have got the first, so the order that we've got these fields included is the order with which that they will appear in the array. And so this is good, because now what we can do is we can pass this first value into our initial file name for the saved dialog. Okay. And so what we'll do is, actually what we might do is we'll put in a date. So my dialog.add text, and what we'll do is we'll put in the experiment date. And the value that we'll put in there is, we'll get the datetime.now, so we'll go current date equals datetime.now, not snow, .now, string format time. And what do we want? We wanted the year, month, day. And so this here will now be car date. No, not subject info. Down here. We'll see what we get out. So hopefully this should populate the current date, but we'll have it backwards because we've formatted this the time so that it's backwards. Okay, so experimental date. So that's not worked. Okay, we'll have a look here. We'll see that in a little bit. What have I done wrong? So here we've got the experiment date. And you say, well, why haven't we got that initial value there? It's because I've got the wrong thing. I've said, hey, please add text, not add field to this dialog box. So we hit cancel there. And then what we'll do is we'll change this to add field. We'll save that again. We'll run this again. I don't know why it's defaulting onto the main screen, but that's not an issue. You'll be able to sort that out. So here we go. Experimental date is 2020 02/28, and yes, that is the correct date. And then name, gender, age. Okay, great. And we'll cancel out of that. So when we hit the cancel button, you'll see it actually returned none. And so we can use something like, so if none, or something like that. So if we actually have something in this show dialog, so we've clicked OK, we then want to proceed and do the rest of the experiment. However, if we've hit cancel, we don't want to run the experiment. We want to essentially just say, hey, look, user has cancelled. We're not going to run the program. Maybe there's a problem, with the experimental setup or with the room that you're doing the experiment in. So what John has given us here is that if we have this coming in, if the OK button was pressed, or if the data in here, all right, is not none, because remember when we hit cancel, it was it returned none. So we'll go show dialog. Okay, if my dialog.ok we'll see what happens here. We'll run back onto here. We'll do this. And we'll just click OK, because that will populate the default values that we've set up there, and we'll see what happens. So OK, and here we go. So we've printed out the actual data there. So we don't need to print it out, because it will print it out for us, because that's what we've got here. It's doing this this check for us. Hey, look, if we've actually got data in there, this is what we're going to do. We're going to print out the show dialog. If we've got data returned from the dialog box, if we've clicked OK. If, however, we click cancel, it's going to return none, and then it should print hey, user cancelled, and then we'll break out of the program. Okay, so here we go. We'll click cancel. It goes user cancelled. Okay, so this is good. All right. So this is our dialog box that we're going to use to set up our experiment. Now, what do we want to create for our file name? So here we had line-task.csv, and we actually hard-coded that. What we want to do now is actually pass into that an automatic copy of how we've set up our experiment. And so what we'll do, if okay, we'll say something like well, let's have a look. The first field in our array, okay, so show dialog array 0 is going to the 0th position. The first position is going to give us the date, and so we want to set up now our our save file. Okay, and the order that we want is I want it to be date underscore subject ID underscore date underscore subject ID line task .csv. This is what I want to save my file as. And so what we want to do is we'll go save file name equals, and so it is going to be, we need the information that's presented in the first position in our dialog box array. So it's going to be my dialog position 0, because remember Python is 0th counting, so we want this plus, and then underscore plus my dialog position 1. That will be the subject ID. That's great. That's good. And then plus something like underscore line task .csv. And so now let's print the save file name to see what we get out. We won't print that out because that might be a bit too confusing for us. And so let's just run with this. Okay. Yes. So we'll go save file name, because that's what we've created up here. So we can pass this into here. No worries at all. I forgot to do that. So we'll go Control S. So now we should get that input dialog box coming up, populated with the initialized data there. Okay, and so if I now put my name as AG, and then we click OK. Okay, dialog object does not support indexing. Okay. Oh, okay, it's because it's not that, it is show dialog. Sorry, show DLG, not my dialog. I do apologize for that. That's the information that we're returning. Okay, let's see. So I created the object, and then I tried to index into that object, and it's saying, hey, look, you can't do that because the object is the object that is displayed on the screen. Once we've clicked OK and we've gotten out of that object, it's then going to return that array of the information, and we've called that show dialog here. So let's just go AG again, OK, and so it's done all that, and so here is the file that we've created, and so that's the date backwards, that's my initials, and then that's the task that we're currently doing. And then here we go. We've actually passed that as our initial file that we wanted to save. And so now all I need to do is navigate to the correct location. Well, it's in the line task folder, that's where I want it to save. And then I just click save, and it's all done. And so you can see now, once we've done that save dialog box, it's returned that whole file path, save file path, that we're then going to pass to our data frame.toCSV routine. Right, hopefully that sort of makes sense. So it's a little bit long-winded, I'll admit, but we've essentially built from scratch a very generic dialog box where we've got some dates and some times and some initialized information here. And then we're basically passing all those variables and those values across into the save dialog box. And then that save dialog box, we will then pass the output of that into our .toCSV function. Okay, so that's in our sandbox here. Excuse me. So let's go and put this all, okay, into Command C, into our line task. Now we want to do that right at the start, before we pretty much, before we run the program. So now we don't need sub ID, okay, but we will need current date. Command C, Command X will delete that, and we'll put that up here. And it won't be date val, it will be, oh yeah, we'll put the date val there. So date val, great. And then this save file name, Control C, we'll cut that and we'll paste that save into our .toCSV. Okay, we can get rid of that. Okay, Command S. Have we got GUI on board? We need to import GUI, so here we go. GUI. All right, we'll see if this is going to work now. So let's clear this. We'll run not line sandbox, but it will be line task.py. Fingers crossed we've done it all and it should work. So it should firstly come up with that dialog box, and so there's the dialog box there saying, okay, experimental date, what's the name? I will just go my initials again, gender and age. Okay, that's great. And then it's saying, okay, where do you want to save it? Yep, we want to save it into there. Good. And so now it should go into the program itself. We should see the fixation. Sub ID is not defined. Why is sub ID not defined? Okay, what are we doing? Okay, let's have a look. On line 261, we're trying to give it a sub ID. Remember, we hard-coded that. But we still have access to that because, remember, in our dialog box, okay, we have got this field here, which is the sub ID, the subject ID. And so that was actually show dialog in the second position there, okay? So all we need to do is we need to just convert that from sub ID to say, hey, look, we've actually got it in that array that we created before. Okay. So we'll do this again. Let's come over here. AG. Okay. Save the file. There. Brilliant. So this should hopefully work now. What I'll do is I'll pause the video, and then once I've finished it, I'll return. We'll see what happens right at the end there. Okay. So I'll pause. Okay, so I've just run that program through the 40 trials. It was already working like it was before. Now we have a look to see if we've saved that file. So here we go. We've got, if we have a look in our atom to the left there, we can see 2020-0228 AG line task, and so that's the file name that we saved and we wanted to save, and it's in the folder where we wanted to save it. Now, did it save it correctly? So I've actually got it here. I've just opened it up now in Excel, and you can see here it seems to have done its thing. Okay. All right, so we've got the trial number, the subject ID, the date, the time, the line length. So remember, that's the number of pixels that the line length was, which was the longest side, the subject response, and the latency. So it took me 10 seconds to answer the first question because I was pausing the videos, okay? So there we go. We've now got GUI control, or graphical user interface control, over setting up the experiment, the subject ID, the subject age, the subject gender. Now, it's probably a good habit to not waste information. So for instance, you're taking information here about the gender and the age. And so what you'd probably want to do is either put that information into the file name, but then that becomes really quite long, or you might want to save another log file with just the information pertaining on, and if you've got some notes that you wanted to take, you'd put in some notes or something like that. Okay, so what we can do is we can actually extend this save file dialog out a little bit further, and what we'll do is we'll actually add into that, we'll go plus underscore plus show dialog 2, okay, or we'll say something like 3 plus underscore line task. And so what we're doing here is that we'll actually include in our file name the age, how old the subject was at time of testing. Okay, so here you can extract out all the information that you want from the dialog box. We won't worry about that too much here. Okay, so there we go. We've now got GUI control over our experiment, and we have got essentially yeah, we've got a pretty neat running program. There's a couple of things that we need to do now, so I'm just thinking about what we wanted to do next, but I'll save that for the next video. We'll leave this video here. It's it's half an hour long, but hopefully you should have followed along what we were doing. We're looking at the GUI functionality in Psychopy here. We created some dialog boxes, and we created a save file dialog box. And then what we were doing with that save dialog box was basically saying, hey, look, this is where we want the file to end up. Okay, so we created the path where we want everything to end up. Okay. All right, we'll leave this video here, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, I'll catch you later.